All right, it's preparing to live stream the meeting. Okay. Setting it up. Setting it up.
All right, are we all set to go?
I think we are.
Okay. Well, hello everyone. Welcome to our second parent pause. It is great to be with you all tonight. We just appreciate you all giving up the next 45 minutes to an hour to spend with us, and yeah, for just welcoming us into your lives and into your homes. If you were not with us last time, I thought we could just reintroduce ourselves and remind you again of just what this is all about. So Rachel, would you want to introduce yourself again?
Sure. Welcome, guys. My name is Rachel Hodges, and I'm so glad that you guys are here. I work at Karis House Community Counseling Center, which is the counseling ministry of the Journey Church. And what I do there is I direct Karis Kids, which is our team of counselors who work with children and adolescents and families. We love to engage and partner with parents. So a little bit about me: I do attend the Journey. I go to the Journey Metro East with my husband, Anthony, and our 3 little kiddos. Our oldest is a 7-year-old boy, and then we have a 4.5-year-old boy, and our daughter is 18 months old. It's a little bit about me. Anything else I should share?
Awesome. That sounds great, Rachel. Yeah, thanks. And I am Jill Oberle. I am also on staff at Karis House and get to work on the Karis Kids team with Rachel. So we get to work with lots of kids and teens and their parents, which has been wonderful. I myself have a 3-year-old son and live in the Shaw neighborhood in South St. Louis City and attend City Church on Sunday mornings for worship. Yeah, so that's just a little bit about us again. And Rachel and I are really here because we get to know some of you in our counseling offices. We get to meet more of you through the Grow Conference that we've been able to do a couple times now at various locations. And gosh, we just have been thinking about you all, this community, quite a bit in this really unique season of parenting, as we are all kind of home with our kids and social distancing and just balancing the weight of living through a global pandemic. And we just felt like, gosh, if we could be a place, if we could create a space really here together to talk about how to do that well, to also be honest about how hard that is, and to hopefully just be a resource, that is really what we're here for. So tonight, Amy Childers, who is the Children's Ministry Director at the West County campus, is going to be moderating kind of the comments. So if you all have questions that arise, they can be really specific to your scenario, to your kiddos, or more general questions about the content that we're talking about tonight. Feel free to post those there. Amy's going to kind of field those, and then we'll have some time at the end of this parent pause tonight to answer a few questions. So Rachel, why don't you get us started kind of in maybe some helpful content for parents?
All right, I will. Thank you so much, Jill. Okay, so as we get started, I just want to introduce you to what we're going to be talking about. And as we focus on what we're going to be talking about tonight, what we're really going to be digging into is something that I briefly introduced last week. So last week, I brought up this idea of felt safety as we were talking about what are our basic needs, what are the things that we are created for. And one of the things I said just briefly there at the beginning was we know that our kids and that us as humans were created to feel safe, right? For those of us who are believers, when we think of the Garden of Eden and what that experience was like, that's where all of our needs were met, and there was an abundance of everything that we needed. And yeah, there was a feeling of felt safety. So I want to slow down and really dig into what am I talking about when I say felt safety. So that's where we're going to start tonight, is defining what is felt safety and how do we cultivate it. So to give a definition, felt safety is something that we provide as adults, as parents, as caregivers. For those of you guys who are teachers or who've been teachers and Journey Kids, this is something that we always have the option and the opportunity to seek to provide for the kiddos in our midst. And it's what we provide when we arrange the environment. So the setting, the environment, and when we adjust our behavior so that our children can feel, again, I'm going to say that they can feel in a profound and basic way that they are safe in their home or their environment and with you. So I'm going to say that one more time. We provide felt safety when we arrange the environment and we adjust our behavior so that our children can really feel in a profound and basic way that they are safe in their home and their environment and with you. So this idea of felt safety really speaks to the times that we might cognitively know, like in our brains, that we're safe and that our children are safe. But for whatever reason, even though we know that our kids are safe, they've experienced either something in the past or they're experiencing something currently that makes them not feel safe. So that's why we talk about this idea of felt safety, because it's not just a cognitive knowing that someone's safe. It's really being curious about, does my child feel safe? Because what's important to know here is that how we are wired, again, this isn't only a cognitive experience of fear, but it's also a physical, and there's a physiology to the experience of fear. Because as humans, we have what we would call an alarm system in our body. And when this alarm system is activated, we will operate instinctively from that. It doesn't necessarily go through our upper brain or through the cognitive processes that we have access to. What we know is it will move us, if we're operating from a place of fear, to that more primitive part of our brain that's really just focused on seeking safety and getting those basic needs met. So when we think about these days and what the last few weeks, month or so, couple months have held for our kids and for our adolescents, we know that it's not surprising that some of our kids are experiencing increased fear or anxiety. And so we really want to think through what are some ways that we can cultivate feeling safe, right? Because there has been parts of our lives that have shifted quickly. There's been things that have been out of our control that have led to changes for us and for our kids, right? I think we can all probably name different things that our kids haven't had the opportunity to do, that they might be feeling disappointed about, or they might just be feeling surprised or nervous that life feels different. Like, why haven't we seen the usual people that we see? Why aren't we going to the places that we normally go to? They might be moved to feelings of uncertainty or of anxiety, and that can lead to kids not having that experience of felt safety. Now I kind of want to pause here, because if I were you, and I guess I'm curious if some of you guys might be thinking like, well, wait a second, there are actual real things in life and real things that are happening today that do feel unsafe for me as an adult or for my kids. I can't guarantee my child that they are safe or that they aren't going to get sick or that I'm not going to get sick. So even talking about fostering felt safety doesn't feel like it's meeting me where I'm at, because there's so many things I don't have control over as a parent. And I just want to say, yeah, that is real. I would totally get if you're sitting there wondering, like, why is this woman talking to me about fostering this thing called felt safety in the midst of these uncertain days? It might feel a little counterintuitive. But again, here is what we know, that what we were created for was to actually feel safe and to feel not afraid. And so what we have the opportunity to do as caregivers is, yes, we cannot guarantee or promise our children that they are always safe or that we are always safe, but we can do everything in our power to communicate to them that we have them, and to do what's in our power to facilitate that feeling of felt safety in the areas that we do have control over. And the great news is there are lots of really practical, easy ways to move our kids towards that experience of felt safety. And that's really what we want to continue to unpack. So last week, when Jill spoke, she talked all about regulation and really dug into this idea of our physiology and our physical needs, and how if we foster lives where we're really living in that green zone, that calm, regulated zone, and if we're able to foster those lives for ourselves and also for our kids, that is a huge way that we can help cultivate that feeling of felt safety. So I would say if you were not able to join us last week, we'd love for you to go and watch the parent pause from last week. That's available at that same link you had last week. If you need that link, just email parent pause and we'll send it to you, parentpause@thejourney.org. And also there is a clip that's just like a brief definition that Jill did of regulation. That's like 3 or 4 minutes. That's also available on the Journey's YouTube page that you can check out just specifically to learn about regulation. But here's what we know. In addition to thinking about regulation, there are other ways that we can also facilitate felt safety. And that's really where we want to dig in tonight, is what is another way that I can cultivate felt safety for my kids? So that's where we're going tonight. And the great news is one way that we can facilitate felt safety with our kids is to engage in play, which is one of the things that I love about kids and about adolescents is, engaging with children and teens, they can bring me to a place of play so quickly. It's like the instinct and the desire to play just overflows out of so many of our kids, and they can just tap into a part of me that is so sweet, and I think can really only be accessed sometimes by our younger friends. So as we think about play, so you know where we're going tonight. First, I'm going to talk about why does play matter. Then we're going to talk about what is true play. And then from there, we're going to talk about how can we facilitate that and what might that look like in our homes. So when we're thinking about play, first I want to answer the question, play. Why does play matter? And here's what we know, that play and engaging in playful interactions can really help build connectedness and relationships. So last week, one of the things we talked about is how feeling connected to other people leads to us feeling safe. And a great way to facilitate this connection is through engaging in play. We also know that play disarms that fear system, that one that I just mentioned, that as our body can be activated towards feeling afraid, there is something about play that can go ahead and deactivate that. And we also know that as we are engaging in play, that stress chemicals can be released. So we can actually it can have an impact on our chemistry, that there are things that we can really be released from us after a good round of play. So I would even invite you now, as I'm talking about play, think about some recent experiences that you have really played, where you have felt free to engage in play and had almost like a playful experience that has left you with decreased stress, having experienced joy, some creativity, things like that. Okay, why else does play matter? Play matters because it gives kiddos and teens a chance to master new life skills. It's oftentimes through playful interactions that we are able to learn so much more quickly than interactions that aren't playful. We also know that play fosters brain integration and creates a network of systems in our brains that we utilize during problem solving and also during creative endeavors. We know that it's through play that our children and teens actually develop and form a sense of their identity and their self-agency. So it's through play that they're often kind of like trying out different things. What do I like? Who am I? Kind of learning about themselves, what they're good at, different skills that they want to learn more of. There's just a lot of kind of getting to know oneself and forming of a self that can happen through deep play. What we also know is that, especially for our young kids, but we'd say this is true for kiddos through adolescence and sometimes even us as adults, is that it's through play that we often work out our emotions or the feelings we have about something, that oftentimes that is a time that our body is actually processing, yeah, some of those feelings, some of those thoughts. As I'm talking about that, I'm thinking of uh, one of the ways that I like to play back when the gym was open is I love to go to the Zumba class, and I feel like there's a season where it's like every time I went to Zumba, there was something about that just let me work out so many different feelings, and oftentimes like my best ideas come in the middle of a Zumba class because there's just something about that motion and that movement and that engaging in play, which is what I find playful, that can really move us as people. So yeah, it really helps us to work out emotions and feelings. Other great or other aspects of play and help us understand why play matters is we know that kids can learn how to trust others and how to interact with others through play, so that as they are seen and delighted in and enjoyed, it's often those playful moments that help them to really grow in their trust and in knowing how to do back and forth interaction with other people. So what we're learning and what we're talking about here is really that play has a huge ability and impact on our brain, and has the power to really shape our brain in really powerful, positive ways. And one analogy that I've heard that I think is really helpful is that engaging in play is almost like investing, that as we are able to ourselves engage in play, and as we can make space for our kids to engage in play, there's an increase in health benefits, there's an increase in relational benefits, and there's an increase in fun and joy, and yeah, again, the release of those chemicals that we talked about. So there's all sorts of reasons why play is great. And as I talk about this, we can imagine that if we are having those types of experiences, that is going to lead us to likely having that experience of, I feel good, I feel safe, I'm being enjoyed. And those are things that cultivate this feeling of felt safety for our kiddos. I think something that is really to note, or is really important to note, that you have probably heard me kind of mention or is coming through already, is that oftentimes we associate play with children. Oftentimes we especially associate play with young children. But when we're talking about true play, we would say that play is actually something that we were all created for. And that, yes, it might look different across the developmental lifespan, but that it is really something that we know that there are benefits for the young child and for the older child and for the adolescent and even for us as adults. So I just want us to keep that in mind, that as you're even thinking about your own regulatory needs and thinking about what you need to live a life that helps you feel in the green, that if you haven't been thinking of things like, how do I play and when do I when do I play, might be a really helpful thing for you to think about. So we're going to talk more about that, but I just wanted to make sure that I said that. Okay, we've talked all about why does play matter. Now I want to talk a little bit about what is true play. And I will tell you, there is so much information and research out there on play, and it is such a fascinating topic. And there's so many areas we could just get lost in the study. So what we really wanted to do is concise that tonight and bring out the themes that are consistent among the literature. And here's what we know, is that true play is actually instinctive. That if you think about the young babe, as they grow, and as you think about even other mammals, right? Like as humans, we are mammals. If you think about other mammals like puppy dogs or little lion cubs, oftentimes they actually have an instinctive playfulness to them. That part of our being mammals is there is a playfulness to us that is instinctual, that it's not something we have to be taught. It's really something that is an instinct that needs to be protected and sometimes drawn out a little bit. That we do have this, we come into the world with an instinctive drive to play. Again, we don't necessarily have to teach young children to explore or be curious or to engage in playful ways. So when we think about what play is, we would say there's a few elements, in addition to being instinctive, that are helpful to make note of. One is we would say that play can be expressive or exploratory. So oftentimes play is a way that kids are expressing their thoughts, their feelings, their physical prowess, they're getting out their energy, they're expressing something. And in addition to expressing, it can also be exploratory. So that's when that curiosity is kicking in, where they really want to understand something. They want to explore, where are all the ants going that I'm seeing this little ant hill come from? Like, how can I find the ant hill and where is they going from there? Or for some of our older kids who get really into specific topics and they just want to study all about astronauts or rocket ships, or what else might kids want to explore? All sorts of things. I'd invite you to think through, what have your kids been exploring lately? Sometimes it's different characters, or they can get really lost in a story and want to explore what's happening with that character. So there's all sorts of ways that our kids can really experience exploring through play. So again, we would say that true play is either expressive, where something is coming out of them, or exploring, where they are seeking to find or try something. So I'm thinking of examples of some of our younger kiddos. A lot of exploring is really seeing, like, how does something work, right? Trying to figure out, like, why does, like, building a stack of blocks and exploring what happens when they knock it over. Some of our older kids, it can be when they're starting to try and make sense of how cars work. That can be for adults too, right? We have some adults who love to collect and consider and explore cars and hobbies, things like that. So again, expressive or exploratory. And some other elements that are just key that we know exist when it comes to true play is there's an element of freedom. So oftentimes in true play, the same rules that exist in real life don't necessarily exist there. So all of a sudden, little characters have personalities and names, or objects can fly, or things like gravity don't exist. So there's a certain amount of freedom. And there's also an amount of enjoyment or joy that comes from this real play. So again, when we're thinking about what is true play, we'd say that it's instinctive, that there's elements of either expression or exploring, and that there's elements of freedom and enjoyment in true play. So as you reflect on that experience of play I invited you to think about earlier, I'd love for you to think about it through this lens of, did it feel instinctive? Was I instinctively engaging with, my husband plays guitar. So when I think about how he plays, I often think about, for him, it's like having a really good jam session where he is just in that moment and in that place that musicians get when they are just fully experiencing that music. And in those points, they're expressing themselves through music or exploring the different ways that things might sound. And there's just a deepness as they settle into a jam session. Okay, so thinking about what true play isn't, what we would say that true play isn't is it's not focused on outcome or productivity, and it's not focused on mastery or achievement. So I want to make sure you don't hear me say that those things are bad. I'm not saying that focusing on outcome or productivity is wrong, or that work or performance or achievement is wrong, and we don't want to help our kids move towards those things. But we do want to make a distinction when we're thinking about this type of restorative developmental play. It is free of this idea of outcome or achievement. Okay, now I want to invite you to continue to think of that time when either you on your own or with someone else experienced true play, and an interaction of play that you experienced that deep joy or freedom as you thought about it. And I would really love to invite you to think through, what does that look like for you? What does play look like for you just on your own as an adult? For some of you, that might feel really foreign. You might say, I'm not actually sure. And I want to make sure you know that that is okay. It's really easy for the instinct of play to dissipate over time with work and responsibilities and adulthood. It's easy for that instinct of play to go away. But for those of you guys who can identify the ways that you play, I would love for you to also think about, does that come through in how you play with your kids? I know for me as a mom, there are certain ways that I can engage and play with my kids that feel like true play for me, and there's other things that don't. And I know from talking with a number of moms, oftentimes this idea, and dads, actually with moms and dads, that this idea of play sometimes can bring about a level of shame because it's like, I don't want to play pretend. Like that is, I don't know how to do that. That's not comfortable for me. And oftentimes when we think of play, that's right where we go is these big imaginary worlds. And that is great play and it can be really fun to engage in. But it's also okay if that is not how you personally find the most freedom in playing. What the invitation really is for us to really reflect on, where have I felt that true deep play and how has that been restorative for me? And when have I experienced that with my kids? And how can we make space for the ways that I can engage in play and the ways that my kid can engage with play? How can those intersect? And sometimes they will intersect and sometimes they won't. And there'll be other ways that we can foster that for our kiddos. Okay, so thinking about that, a few other things I just want to share is I want to answer the question for you, how do we facilitate play? So the first thing we hope that this night serves as is just an invitation for you guys as parents to feel the freedom to have space for your kids to play right now. We know right now that there are so many things that you guys are navigating at home as you're some of you are having to be pretty hands-on with helping your kids' school happen. Other of you guys have older students, junior high students and high school students, and they might not need you to be as hands-on, but there's still just a lot more to navigate with our kids being home from school all the time. So first of all, we just want for you to have the permission to really make space and to prioritize play. We know that developmentally it is so important, but we just also know that for some reason it's really easy for play and place and time for play to not end up as high on the priority list with everything else we contend with. So we hope that this just gives you permission that that time is good and it is valuable and you don't have to apologize for it. Something else that is important to note is we can't actually demand our kids to play, which we know, right? How many times have we told our kids, okay, go play, and it's not happening. And then there are other times when we need them to come to the table for dinner or something, or it's time to go to bed and they are so deep in play and we're completely interrupting one of their play moments. So it's important for us to just feel the freedom of, we can't demand them to move to a place of deep play, and that isn't our job, but there are things that we can do to facilitate it. So here are the things that we can do. First of all is to start with focusing on the relationship and on just being aware of what is your connection with your kiddo or your teen like right now. Are you guys in a good place? Oftentimes, if our relational needs aren't met or if stuff feels kind of weird there, it's harder for us to settle into deep play. So we want to start with that, especially if you're feeling like you need to facilitate play because they need a little bit of help getting there. So we would encourage you to connect. Maybe it's over breakfast or over a meal, talk to them about how they're doing, engage with them in that way, and then kind of maybe, depending on their age, give a suggestion or get them set up with an activity and see if out of that place of connection, they're able to settle into a place of play. And then the next thing we encourage you to do, so the first is to focus on relationship and start with connection, because we know that relational needs and emotional needs have to be met before our kiddos can necessarily settle into play. And then the second one is to create space and boredom. So oftentimes one of the greatest gifts that we can give as parents is really make space for them that's free of work or responsibilities or performance, and allow that space to really hopefully make space for their instincts to kick in to engage with play. So that's it. Those are the two of the key things that we can do to help facilitate play. Okay, so we've talked about a lot. I love thinking about play. I think it's one of those things that we're created for that, yeah, is just so, I know what it feels like to experience good play and the connection and the joy that comes from that. And it feels really sweet to know how restorative it is for our children and for us. So as I have shared a lot about it, what I want to do is invite you guys to take a few minutes to reflect. So I'm going to give you some questions now that you can make note of and maybe select one or two to answer later on. The first one is, what comes to mind when you think of the word play? So this isn't like a right or wrong answer, not only thinking about what I've said tonight, but in general, when you think about play, what comes to mind? What are you drawn to? Another thing I would love for you to consider reflecting on is, what are your childhood memories of playing? When you think about yourself, I'd encourage you to think about yourself as a little kid, and then again at like the junior high and high school age years. What did play look like for you? What were the things that you got lost in for hours? What would you gravitate to when you had free time? And then the last question I'd love for you to think about is, what's it like for you to play? What is it like for you to play with your children? What feelings come up? When is it easier for you to engage with play? When is it harder? I just want to name that this can be a hard time to enter into play because of the stress that we're carrying as caregivers. And so if this is hard for you right now, please know that that is okay. We want you to know about play because it is something that is good for us and it's good for our kids. But it's also okay to name that, like, that's just not where I'm at right now. And I need to focus on the regulation stuff that they talked about last week, because that's where I am. And as we spend more and more time in that green zone, it might be more possible to engage with play. And it might be a time to be really curious about what your needs might be related to play. Okay, so those are some questions to think about. So we did want to leave you with a tool of sorts or something to think about, especially for those of you where this feels foreign and maybe kind of far away. But when we think about connection and play, there is a specific exercise that oftentimes we recommend that parents do with their kiddos. And we call it structured connecting time, connected play time, things like that. And what we'd encourage you to do is just set aside 10 minutes. For some families, their starting point is we're going to set aside 10 minutes per week. For other families, it's 10 minutes per day. For other families, it's 10 minutes every other weekend. So really start with where you're at and select 10 minutes. And in that, when we think about that structure connecting time, once we've set those 10 minutes apart, what we want to do first is start with connecting with our child. And so we want to think about that from a physiological level. So we're making eye contact, we're thinking about our voice, we are communicating to our child with both our word and our body that we're excited to have this time together. We are really thinking about what we need to do to show up and be present in a way that invites relationship and connection. And during this time, what we're going to do is invite them to choose an activity that we will do with them for 10 minutes. So that's really an opportunity to give them voice. So, and to let them choose, how are we going to spend this time? Oftentimes our kids know right away and can tell us. They are like, we are going to play Legos. We're going to go play basketball, we're going to go on a bike ride, and our kids know right away what they want to do with us. Some of our kids, if this is new, they might need a few prompts, and if they need a few prompts, we would encourage you to just give them a couple of options. And what's important to note is during this time, we really want to focus on engaging with them, on matching their behavior, and on focusing on, when we think about praise or encouragement, we want to focus on their character versus their performance. So we want to think about, wow, you're working so hard, or things like, I love to watch you draw. It's so fun to watch you shoot baskets. I love getting to spend this time with you. That sort of encouragement that's more about them and who they are and you being together than necessarily performance or outcomes. And some things that we would encourage you just to avoid in this time are things like asking questions. We want to avoid this being a more cognitive engagement, which is what we're prone to with language, and have it be really like where we can just be present and focus more on observing what they're doing and responding to that. We really also want to protect this time from teaching or instructing. And if unless absolutely needed correcting, that this can just really be a time that we're coming alongside of and entering our kiddos' world. Again, we're not saying that teaching or instructing are wrong or bad. There's definitely a need for those things, but more just using this as a time to be with and to observe. And then again, we want to protect and give them the opportunity to take the lead in what we're playing and how we're playing. So if you're like me and you have multiple kids at home, it can be really hard to find sometimes even 10 minutes to just spend one-on-one with a kiddo. And so I just want to name that that's true, and say that that's where it might be that you're picking one kid a week to spend 10 minutes with, and finding, maybe it's during younger kids' nap time, or when older siblings can have some time to read a book or have some screen time so that you can just get some focused one-on-one time with the kids. So that's what we would call our structured connecting time. And we think that that can be a great tool for facilitating play and engagement with your kiddos. So we hope that you find that helpful. Okay, there's one last thing that I want to encourage you to do. If you're sitting here and you're still puzzled and you're thinking about how do I play? I'm not really sure. There's something really fascinating out there called the 8 play personalities. There's 8 of them. And the basic idea is that we all have 1 or 2 major ways that we are drawn to play. So if that's something you're really curious about, you can go ahead and Google it. It pops up in different places, and there's just 8 different types. And so if you're kind of coming away from tonight wondering where you fit, I would encourage you to look that up and spend some time in the next week or 2, maybe considering, how do I play? Okay, so as you go, again, the thought is that one thing that we can do to facilitate feelings of felt safety is to engage and play with our kids, and also facilitate space for them to play. So I hope you find that helpful. If you have more questions about that, please feel free to put them in the comment chat box below. And you're also always welcome to reach out and email them to parentpause@thejourney.org. So with that, I want us all to take a deep breath. I know that I have sent a lot of information your way. So let's go ahead and pause and take a deep breath. And I hope more than anything, as we think about play, that it feels inviting to you and not like another thing to put on your to-do list, or an overwhelming thing to figure out how to facilitate your kids, but more it's just an invitation to ponder what it means to be human and to be created for play. With that, we're going to transition now to a time of question and answers.
Yeah, so I'm going to get us started with a question that we actually had submitted last week that we didn't get a chance to address. So I'll read that question real quick and kind of weigh in. So the question was, my daughter is 6. She is energetic and determined, but also has a hard time when she doesn't want to do something. I think it's her reaching for some sense of control. Thoughts? Okay, so I love this question. And I think one thing I love to see was kind of this parent's questioning and wondering about her child and her child's behavior, right? That she struggles in this way. And I wonder if potentially this child is struggling with a need for control. And something that really drives a lot of kind of our view within our Karis Kids team, and something that we really firmly believe in, is that kiddos, and really people in general, oftentimes their behavior is communicating an underlying need that they have. And so I think this parent is kind of questioning, like, what is the underlying need for my child in these moments, or what is kind of the function of my child's behavior. And so it's helpful for us as caregivers to kind of sometimes have that paradigm when we're experiencing our child exhibiting like difficult behaviors, to kind of have that framework to be able to pause and say, like, wait a second, what is potentially the need behind my child's behavior? So I love to see that from that parent as she's kind of wondering what's going on. And I certainly think that it is very plausible that this sweet little 6-year-old girl is struggling with wanting to feel some sense of control. I recently heard someone say, the only thing that feels certain right now is that everything is uncertain. And I think that we as adults experience that feeling. And I think that our kids are experiencing that feeling too, because so much has changed in our worlds. And for our littlest kids, right, this child is 6, so she might be in kindergarten or first grade. She doesn't go to school every day anymore. She doesn't get to be with her friends in the same way. She might not get to go to soccer practice on the weekends. There's so many ways that this child is probably feeling like her world has been turned upside down. And so I think it's very plausible that she is trying to find some sort of control. I also think too, the mom was able, or the dad, I should say mom or dad, I'm not sure who submitted this, but something they named was that this child is particularly struggling when they're faced with a task they don't want to do. And I just want to name, like, I feel that even as an adult, when I am faced with a task that I don't want to do, I don't have good feelings about that either. And so just having some compassion for our kiddos in those moments of like, I wish, I know that feeling, right? Like that is hard to have to engage and do something we don't always want to do. I'm also curious. If this child actually has certain expectations about their time, about the day, what they want to be doing next. What's important to note about this particular age of 6 is that this is very developmentally appropriate. So when we think about the stages of development, the age of 6 is right around the time when our kids are starting to initiate tasks and start executing plans. So they start to think through their day, like, what do I want to do? What do I want to accomplish? What games do I want to play? And so there's a very real possibility that this child has some expectations about like how she wants to spend her time. And no, I just kind of want to give you parents like freedom to know like, oh, this actually is a very mentally appropriate task, and is something that's actually going to serve my child down the road. So don't be alarmed if they have a lot of ideas and plans and expectations for their time. So what kind of could your response be, I guess, to your child? Like, how might you approach your child in these moments when she's a bit resistant to doing tasks that she doesn't want to do? Well, I think potentially the first thing is to anticipate which tasks are going to be hardest for your child. Oftentimes we can start to kind of track certain points of the day when our child's going to become more dysregulated and potentially a bit more resistant to what we're asking. And so just start to note that, like, oh, transitioning from breakfast into her morning meeting for school is really difficult. So just start to kind of proactively note that and think about that. And then try to be proactive in how you approach that task. So you're going to want to give warnings that a transition is happening, right? So in about 5 minutes, we're going to clean up breakfast and move into morning meeting. I have to give my child like multiple warnings, 10 minutes, 5 minutes, 2 minutes, just to like get him ready and anticipate what's coming next. I would also say that as you're approaching transitions, try to make it as playfully engaging as you can. So Rachel just taught us all about play, and it's amazing how much play can kind of diffuse really stressful situations. Recently, my husband and I have discovered that my child has become deeply attached to his stuffed animals. And when we ask him to do a task like, you need to go brush your teeth or put your shoes on, he will become resistant to us. But if I hold up his Peter Rabbit and Peter Rabbit tells him to go brush his teeth, he magically does it. And we kind of scratch our heads and we kind of laugh about it. But there's something playful that is engaging to our child. And so try to think of fun ways to get them to play with you even in those transitions. And just checking my notes. I want to make sure that I have all of this. And then I would say, like, if the child is still continuing to struggle after giving warnings, after playfully engaging with them, just name that emotion for them to say, like, oh, this is really frustrating to have to clean up your toys. You really wish we could keep playing. There's actually something that's very calming in our brains when someone gives language to our experience and communicates that they understand where we're coming from. I know I experience that as an adult. If I'm sharing a disappointment with a friend and she says, like, oh, that is really the worst. I totally get it. I understand why this is hard for you. I feel so much better, right? And so if we can provide that understanding for our kids too, that oftentimes can help them move through the disappointment that they're experiencing or the frustration that they're feeling. And then if it's still continuing to be an issue, I would say try to offer choices or a compromise. So if my kiddo is struggling to move from one task to another or transition, oftentimes I will say something like, all right, buddy, I think we need a compromise. What if I let you play with this toy for another 2 minutes? And offer some sort of compromise with the understanding that, like, once we've reached that decision, we have to move forward. But a lot of times your kiddo will just feel validated, like, oh, you get what I really am wanting in this moment, or provide choices with them, for them of what they could do instead. And then if they're still continuing to struggle, I would say try to scaffold that transition as much as you can. So what I mean by that is you want to be in close proximity. You want to be offering help as much as you can. So let's say we use the example of transitioning from breakfast to morning meeting, saying, like, okay, I'm going to grab your plate and I want you to grab your utensils and we're going to walk them over to the sink together. Just so that you are physically present with them doing the task, and just kind of being that connecting piece for them as they move into doing things that unfortunately they just don't want to do, but we sometimes have to do. So I hope that's helpful. Yeah, Rachel, do you have any other thoughts about this kiddo and what might be helpful for this parent?
I think I just want to acknowledge that it's hard.
Yeah.
Those are hard moments with our kiddos, especially when we can tell that something's bothering them, and yeah, just trying to make space, like sense of that and space to navigate, like what is underneath, what's happening here. And I think in general that can be hard with kids of all ages, but especially in seasons like this, I think we can find ourselves just with more to consider as we're trying to look underneath the behavior. Like, is this related to everything that's going on in the world and how much has shifted or not? And so I just want to say, yeah, as a fellow mama, I get it, especially with a 7-year-old. Yeah, I think that transition to all the plans and having ideas and thoughts about for the day just is a shift. So I do have another question that I would love to answer that came in tonight. One of our questions is, what if a nursing baby makes it difficult to engage and play with our older kids? And I just want to say, yes, I would say that's not even a question. That is a reality that nursing children and having kids and infants and babies to take care of does make engaging in play with our older kids hard and more difficult, and can take more intentionality. And so first I want to say that, again, when we think about engaging with our kiddos, sometimes our starting spot is, I'm going to set aside this 10 minutes where I'm going to be fully present with you, and you're going to get to choose how we spend this time. And that's likely going to be something with a young nursing baby that we have to maybe have some support to be able to do. So whether that means that the baby is being taken care of by a co-parent, if you have a co-parent or a spouse that you're parenting with, or maybe it's during nap time, or in the morning before your baby wakes up. If your older child wakes up first, I say it's finding a small section of time where you can be with just your one child, if you're thinking about that structured connecting time. And then when we think about just like regular home life and home rhythms together, just trying to navigate, what does it look like to be available to our older kids when we also have younger children that we're tending to, especially in that stage of nursing where I just feel like you spend hours sometimes like just on the couch nursing. So some ideas are that I found to be effective is to think through kind of like, where are you used to being with your baby, and as you're nursing them, are you able to have opportunities for your kiddo to play near you? And oftentimes if as you're nursing, your older kiddos can kind of come in and check in with you and say hi and have that connecting moment and feel settled like they're with you. Oftentimes then after they're settled and maybe have just been close to you to read a book or something like that, they might then end up wandering away and finding something across the room to play with. They might stick by your side for the majority of the time, or they might, once they've felt like they've had that space with you, feel the drive to go and explore and find something nearby to play with. Again, that's not something that we can force, but it can be something that we provide invitations to if we're thinking through kind of what can be in the area as we are caring for our children. So that's one thought. I think another thing is to, I think more so, or yeah, something else that I'm thinking about is just an invitation to be so tender with yourself. I think there's something about that season of caring for a young child, a nursing kiddo, that we can forget really how costly or how much of an investment those days and those weeks and those first few months are. And so I think something that we have to wrestle with as moms and dads is, how do we just have realistic expectations for ourselves and our family in those seasons? So yes, play is important, but almost allowing it to look different for a season, I think, is a way that we can, just be gentle and kind of almost take care of and nurture ourselves. And so it might be rethinking through, how do you playfully engage with your kiddo and what feels possible right now and what doesn't. So there might be some ways that we are used to playing with our kiddos that we can't do in the same way right now. And so it might be part of what we might have to do is to identify what are the ways we're trying to engage with play with our kiddos that isn't working with our older kiddos in this season, that we maybe need to kind of just allow to not work right now, and what are maybe some new things that we can try. So maybe you can't sit and build Legos all morning like you used to when it was just that, the one older child. So now it looks like making space to have just mommy and big kiddo time, baking or doing something different that you maybe can do when you're wearing the younger baby who's nursing, something like that. So I think it might just invite some time to really name like what isn't working, and is there a way to creatively try something new? Yeah, such a good question. I know those days, they are tender and complicated sometimes to navigate. Jill, would you add anything to that question?
I think that was great. Yeah, I feel great about that.
All right, do you have another question you'd like to answer?
Yeah, let's look at, we got a question asking, what can we as parents do to help our students overcome the grief of having their first year of high school and first year of college so abruptly ended? I feel like the heartache in that, for just so much that's lost in the season. I think about too, like our seniors who are graduating, and there is, so often like we as a society and people mark endings with some sort of celebration, and it just feels like and even beginnings with some sort of like celebration, and it just feels like so much has ended without any closure or and we're having to figure this out kind of in our own little pockets of our families and not in our larger communities. That just feels really hard. So I just want to name that, of like, I think you naming it as grief is just spot on. I think that's exactly what that is. And I think, you know, our role as caregivers is to give our kids space for that, is to allow them to have their feelings about that. I think sometimes as caregivers, it's difficult for us to see our kids sitting in really uncomfortable emotions to be experiencing grief. And so I know for me, like, I would love to just put a silver lining on it, or I don't know, just offer some way to fix it if I can. And just kind of knowing, like, I think what our kids need from us is for us to just be present with them in that, and to allow them to experience those feelings and to name those feelings with them. That to me feels just kind of like what is the most helpful, because if you've ever experienced grief, right, there's very rarely anything that anyone can do or say that makes it go away or really makes it feel better. It's just generally people who are showing up, who are by your side, who are allowing you to feel whatever messy emotions you're feeling, and just allow you to be present. And so I think if you can do that for your kiddos or the kiddos in your care, you're going to be providing them with much more than you think. I think we want to do so much more as caregivers, and to know that that is enough, and you're actually providing your kiddos with some really sweet, tender, attuned care. Yeah. What do you think, Rachel?
Yeah, I just resonate with what you're saying. And I think the only other thing I would add is to know that I think something we have to do as caregivers as we are walking our kids through these significant losses is also ourselves grieve the losses for them. I was just talking with a mom over the weekend who is the mom of a senior in high school, and we were talking about the things that her daughter is grieving and how in some ways that matches up with the mom's grief, but some of the things that mom is grieving for her daughter is not yet grieving. So I think there's something about that we really need to think about ourselves and our own grief, and how are we giving ourselves the space and the freedom to grieve those things, and where are we getting that care as we grieve, and then how are we attentive to and just in tune with our kids and where they're at in that grief. And also to know that grief is a complicated thing, and there are various stages, and it's not on a timetable. So I think it's easy for us to enter these seasons of grief and loss and kind of think that we know, or try to expect like what our kids may or may not be sad about, or what they might not grieve, and kind of have a timeline for it. And we know that oftentimes it can be specific or look specific to our individual kiddos. So there are patterns in grief, but really allowing it to unfold and attending to what your child or your teen is saying to you is a huge gift. Such a good question. Okay, there's one more question that I think I'll address as our last question for the night. If we're not able to get to your question tonight, know that we are logging all these questions, and we'll continue to revisit them in future Parent Pause evenings like tonight, or in some of the little videos that we'll be putting out throughout the weeks. So if you have a question come up that you didn't get to ask yet, or that you think of in the coming days or weeks, just feel free to email it to parentpause@thejourney.org, and we will add that to our list as well. Okay, so the last question was in regards to our structured connecting time, and one mom wrote in and asked, if my young child wants to watch a TV show during his structured connecting time, should I steer him another direction, or do I watch that with him and engage and discuss as they watch? That is such a great question. So what do we do if we're extending this invitation to our child to have this time together, and we ask them, what do they want to do? And they choose watching something or playing something that involves screens. And I think what I would say in an ideal world is, if possible, we would love to leave screens out of the interaction. Oftentimes, screens get in the way of eye contact, and it can be like another external thing that can take away our attention just in a different way than like crayons and markers and a board game or something like that. So if at all possible, like if possible, we'd say, yeah, if we could say, oh, it does sound fun to watch that. You know what? I think we should watch that later. I would love to figure out a different way that we could spend this time together instead. I think that that would be, if I were in your shoes, that's where I would start, say, oh, we're going to save that screen time for later. I love that idea. So we want to keep it light and playful. That would be a great idea. That would be really fun. What if we found something else instead? I think would be primarily where I would land, especially with the younger child. I do know that sometimes for our adolescents, oftentimes how they really feel the most comfortable, or a great starting spot for engagement with them, can be things like video games, which can be a great way. Like sometimes that is where we have to start with our teenagers, as we start there, and then maybe we might transition to a different way of connecting. But I would say, if at all possible, if you could have that time not include screens, that would be ideal. Jill, what would you add anything to that, or maybe even disagree?
Yeah, I think that is hard. That's hard.
Compete and contend with screens. It's not easy.
Yes. Yes. And I do, yeah, I think I'm glad you noted kind of the, if we're dealing with a teenager in particular, right, they're spending a lot of times on the screen with binge watching shows, playing video games. And so I definitely think that, like, as a parent, you can take interest in that.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
And like utilize that in a way to connect with your child, or with your teen. And you're right, Rachel, if that's kind of the entry point, I think, you know,
Take your entry point.
scaffold that a little bit, right? Like make that your entry point and work your way up to, we're going to do our, you know, if it's a girl, we're going to do each other's nails, or, yeah, going and shooting hoops in the backyard with your son, or whatever that might look like. But, yeah.
Maybe the summary is kind of like, know realistically where you're starting. And if that is what your kid can give you that day, take it, right? Like if that is what is going to allow you to have this 10 minutes and this is the time for that 10 minutes, I would take it. If you think it can be redirected and something else could be engaged, we'd say go for that. But if it can't, it is great to just honestly start with where you are at. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And still keep those things in mind, though, of having that warm language, thinking about how your body language is communicating to them that you're excited about having that time, commenting on how you enjoy being with them, avoiding instructing and asking extra questions, things like that. If you're interested, we do have a handout that I don't know how to make available on YouTube, but if you like the handout that really spells out that structured connecting time, feel free to email us at parentpause@thejourney.org, and we will send a copy of that document to you in your email.
Awesome. Well, I think that we are nearing the end of our time together. So I am going to just close us in prayer. But before I do, I want to thank you all for being here tonight, for asking questions, engaging with the material. I know this is a season where there is a lot of noise about how we should be spending our time, what we should be doing as parents. And so I hope that Rachel and I can be in this place, the space of Parent Pause can be a place where you all can kind of come, take a deep breath, be reminded of some truth about the fact that you are a child of God, that your children are children of God. And in that, there is so much grace for each of us as we're kind of navigating a season that is new and unknown and has no real guidebook or instruction manual. So we thank you guys for trusting us to walk through that with you. So I'm going to pray and then we will end our time together tonight. All right. Lord Jesus, we are just thankful for your spirit and your presence with us in a season that feels uncertain. Lord, we thank you that you are our guide, that you are with us. God, we thank you for this community of caregivers and just for their desire to love their children well, to just provide homes that are filled with grace and that are modeling your love, Lord. We pray for our coming week that you would just provide safety and health and wellness, Lord, that you would provide lots of moments where we can play, where we can be connected and providing felt safety for one another and relationships, God. We thank you for the many ways that you have created us to be people that play. We love you so much. Amen.
Amen. All right, guys, thanks for being with us tonight. We look forward to doing this again. It will likely be a couple of weeks from tonight, probably 2 weeks from tonight, but just watch your local Facebook Journey Kids group and they will let you know for sure.
All right.
Good night.
Guys.